In the Bible, in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, Christ was recognized to be the Prince of Peace. He was never to be recognized as the promoter of war. And he even said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be the children of God." He never said, "Blessed are the war makers." It was the peacemakers that we must honor and protect. Christ was very, very clear on how we should treat our enemies, and some days I think we quite frequently forget about that. Early in the history of Christianity, they struggled with the issue of war and peace because Christ taught about peace. Did that mean Christ was advocating pacifism? The early church struggled with this and came to the conclusion, at least in those early years, that Christ was not a pacifist, but he was not a war promoter. And this is when they came up with the just war principles, saying, yes, war could be necessary, but only under dire circumstances, and it should be done with great caution. All other efforts should be exhausted before we go to war, and always under the proper authority. And today, I think the proper authority is not the UN or the NATO forces that take us to war. There were great dreams by Isaiah in the Old Testament about the time that would come when the swords would be bent into plowshares and spears into pruning forks. The dream of ending the wars and to the point where peace is prosperous. And I have come to a strong conviction that one of the most greatest threats to the family is war. It undermines the family. Just in our last decade, an undeclared war that we're dealing with, we've lost over 8,500 men and women in our armed services. We have 40,000 who have returned, many of them with severe amputations, and is in essence forgotten by the general population of this country. We have literally hundreds of thousands begging and pleading for help. I talked to a young man the other day, and he was telling me about losing all his buddies and his frustration with the war and not having a goal to winning the war and not knowing what it would end. And yet, his conclusion was, almost in tears, he said to me, he says, "I lost my buddies over there, but now I'm losing many of them to suicide." And when you think of this, of what the consequences of war, the death and destruction, what does it do to the families? What does it do to the husbands and the wives and the mothers and the daughters who have to deal with these problems? So yes, it is very, very damaging. War costs a lot of money and causes a lot of poverty. Poverty and the economic crisis in this country is undermining the family. But $4 trillion of debt has been added in the last 10 years to fight a war that seems to have no end. Wars generally lead to inflation, the destruction of money. We don't honor the biblical principles of honest money. We invite this idea that we can spend endlessly and we can print the money, and literally it undermines the family and undermines the economic system. When you lose a job, it's harder to keep the family together. Divorce rates are very, very high among the military because these young men are being sent back 2 and 3 and 4 times. And there was one story told me about a little boy. He was 10 years old, and his dad was getting ready to go back again. He was screaming, "I hate you, Daddy. I hate you, Daddy," because he was leaving him. So this is why in the early church they talked about being very careful about going into war, and also to be thinking about the admonition that peace is far superior to war. That should be our goal.
Dr. Ron Paul, more than 4,000 babies delivered, a man of faith, committed to protecting life.
This whole notion of life not being valuable just is something I was never able to accept. I happened to walk into an operating room where they were doing an abortion on a late pregnancy. They lifted out a small baby that was able to cry and breathe. And they put in a little bucket and put it in the corner of the room and pretended it wasn't there. I walked down the hallway and a baby was born early, slightly bigger than the baby that they just put in a bucket. They wanted to save this baby. So they might have had 10 doctors in there doing everything conceivable. Who are we to decide that we pick and throw one away and pick up and struggle to save the other ones? Unless we resolve this and understand that life is precious and we must protect life, we can't protect liberty. I'm Ron Paul, and I approve this message.